There have been many mysteries throughout history that have left people scratching their heads, as there seems to be no logical explanation for what has occurred. Some of these mysteries are eventually brought to a close when they're solved, but there are many more that continue to baffle even the most seasoned of experts who have tried their best to make sense of them, only to fail time and time again. Number 5. In some rare cases, when a person goes missing, they're found again months or even years later, and it's then revealed that they've been living a completely different life in the time that they were being searched for. But this could be because they couldn't handle the stresses that came with their everyday life. They just wanted to start a new life somewhere else, or because they suffer from mental issues that cause them to become confused, with some of these people ending up living amongst the homeless communities as they have nowhere else to go. But in some cases, a missing person is found alive and well, and then it comes to light that they've been living a parallel life for years, even before going missing. One such case played out in 2015, when a former Canadian Olympic athlete disappeared. It all started on the 3rd of November 2015, when Harold Backer, a former Olympic rower who represented Canada during the 1984, 1988, and 1992 Games, told his wife that he was heading out of their home in Victoria to go on a bike ride. But when he didn't return, she became concerned that something untoward may have happened to him. What followed was a convoluted series of events that no one could have seen coming. A woman from Port Angeles in Washington, who was chosen to remain anonymous, later told investigators that she saw Backer in Port Angeles 2 days after his mysterious disappearance. She added that he was near the entrance of a restaurant called Downriggers, which is situated near the terminal that serves the Coho Ferry. He asked her if she knew where the bathrooms were, and she pointed him in the right direction. She added that she remembered him because she thought he was rather handsome and that he struck her as charismatic. She would then see Backer again 2 days after her first sighting, while he was having a conversation with an unknown man outside the Port Angeles Tourist Bureau. She estimated that the man was a little older than Backer, and noted that he was shorter with a sturdy build, and she remembered that he had an impressive head of white hair. On the 7th of November, she came across reports stating that Backer had gone missing, and she instantly recognized the man in the reports as the one she spoke to that day. What convinced her that the man was Backer was the hat he was wearing in the pictures provided during the report, as it contained a rowing insignia, something that you don't see very often, and he was wearing the same hat when she saw him. She then decided to contact the authorities to report what she had seen. She spoke to officers in both Port Angeles and Victoria, but they didn't seem to take her too seriously, as they thought she'd gotten the times wrong since they had information that he was on the ferry much later than she reported. But she remained adamant that her timings weren't off. Back in Backer's hometown, searches had been conducted in hopes that someone had seen him, but all that was known was that he got onto the Coho Ferry in Victoria, and that the ferry was traveling to Port Angeles. One of Backer's friends, Luke Mills, boarded the same ferry a few days after he went missing, as he was worried that Backer may be in distress. He speculated that Backer may have set out to cycle the Olympic Peninsula, which lies along the coast in western Washington, and he was hopeful that he could find some clues as to his friend's movements or whereabouts. When surveillance footage in both Vancouver Island and Washington State of the areas near the ferry was checked, investigators spotted a man who they thought was Backer getting off in Port Angeles with a bicycle on the 3rd of November. Everyone involved started to worry that Backer may have sustained an injury while cycling, and that he was unable to contact anyone for help. But then the case took an unexpected turn, when some of his friends and family members revealed that he may have absconded with money that they'd given him as investments into his company, which was called My Financial Backer Corp. They came forward to report that they'd received worrying letters from Backer, in which he stated that he had lost all of the money they invested, and he blamed it on the dot-com crash that occurred in 1999. Knowing that he was in a lot of trouble and that he would be expected to repay the money, he opted to keep it to himself, as he thought that he would be able to correct the mistake sometime in the future. But as the years went by, he was unsuccessful, and eventually the stress of the situation got the better of him. He apologized profusely in the letters, admitting that he was now basically running a pyramid scheme, and that the people who were set to suffer most from his dishonesty were his friends, colleagues, and members of his family. His investors received the letters 2 days after he mysteriously vanished, and they reported that they were set to lose millions of dollars if Backer was unable to compensate them. 2 of his clients had invested as much as $2 million, and another 13 investors came forward with similar concerns. Once this information came to light, Backer's business became the focus of a financial crime investigation, and it soon became clear that what he admitted to was all true. Investigators knew that Backer had traveled to a bank immediately after he got onto the ferry, and he spent a very short time there before leaving again. For the next year and a half, no sign of Backer could be found, and one of his friends, Kip McDaniel, who's also a former Canadian national team rower, never stopped looking for him, even going as far as keeping track of reader data on media websites in case he could spot repeat visitors, but it came to nothing. To all involved, it seemed that Backer had decided to make a break for it, and that he'd been successful. But then came a fresh twist in the story. On the 13th of April, 2017, Backer returned to Victoria, where he immediately went to the police department to hand himself over. This resulted in him being handed a permanent ban as a mutual fund representative, as well as being slapped with a $2.7 million fine. He also needed to pay over $17,000 in costs, and the fine will be reduced as payments are made to those that he defrauded. Added to this, he was handed a 13-month prison sentence after pleading guilty to a fraud charge related to losses of more than $5,000. There is, though, no indication of where Backer was and what he was doing during the 18 months that he was missing, and it's unlikely that he'll ever reveal that information to the public. Number 4. Throughout history, people have told tales of doppelgangers who are the spitting image of another person. Some of these stories are rather mundane, with 2 people stumbling across each other's paths and being shocked at how similar they look. But some of these accounts can be a little more unsettling, as they contain elements of the paranormal. One such case occurred during the 1840s, when a school teacher by the name of Emily Sagi found it impossible to hold down a position at any school for an extended period of time, despite her being hailed as an excellent teacher with many years of experience. In 1948, she started a new role at a school in what is now known as Latvia. But before she started her new job, it was noted that she'd served at 18 schools prior, which raised a few red flags. But the children that she taught at the new school seemed to like her and stated that she was a good teacher. But things would start to get a little strange when the children started seeing an exact double of Emily in the classroom, sometimes while she wasn't there. Sometimes she would just be sitting next to her, while on other occasions she would seem to be copying her every move, but Emily was completely unaware. It all came to a head one day when Emily left the classroom to pick some flowers, but just moments after she left, the doppelganger materialized in front of the children. They decided to investigate by touching the teacher's double and found that their hands passed right through, describing the feeling as similar to touching a cobweb. Needless to say, Emily didn't last much longer at the school, as some of the children's parents started considering moving their children to another school, and it isn't known what became of her after that. As disturbing as this case is, there is another that has no paranormal connection, but is considered by many to be even more distressing. It involves a set of triplet boys named Edward Galland, David Kelman, and Robert Shafran. The 3 boys were born on the 12th of July, 1961 in Glen Oaks, New York, but they would soon become the subjects of an experiment that most people have labeled as cruel and unforgivable, all in an effort to observe the differences between nature and nurture. Just 6 months after they were born, the 3 boys were separated and sent to 3 different adoptive homes as part of the experiment, which was conducted by Dr. Peter Neubauer, who's noted to have worked with Sigmund Freud's daughter, though he's since passed away. None of the 3 boys, nor their adoptive parents, were made aware that they were part of an experiment, but Neubauer would visit each of the 3 boys once a year until they turned 10 years old to check on their progress and whether they'd been affected by their unwitting separation. The adoption agency was informed that an experiment was underway, and they complied, sending David to live in a working-class home. Eddie was sent to a middle-class family, and Bobby to an upper-class home environment. During Neubauer's visits, the boys would be asked to complete tasks, including completing puzzles and creating drawings. It was noted that all three boys were acting out of the ordinary, which would later cause great anger in the triplets, as they felt that they could have received the help they needed in this regard much sooner than they did. Some of the results of the experiment are rather grim, as all three of the boys would show adverse behavior during their childhoods, with David and Eddie both eventually receiving treatment for mental issues. Robert was involved in a robbery to which he pleaded guilty, and he was placed on probation for some time. When asked about these incidents later on, the three men would agree that they were unknowingly suffering from separation anxiety. But the experiment would take an unexpected turn in 1980, when Bobby started attending Sullivan Community College, and as soon as he started on his first day, he knew something strange was going on. People who he never met before spoke to him as if they had known him for years. They would welcome him back even though he had never been to a single class at the college before. And eventually, a student named Michael Domnitz realized that they'd confused him with Eddie, who was one of his friends. Michael decided to call Eddie to inform him of the strange coincidence, and asked the two doppelgangers to speak to each other on the phone. Bobby was amazed at how similar his voice was to Eddie's, and he decided that he wanted to meet him as soon as possible, since everyone at the college who knew Eddie was amazed at the similarities in their appearance. Michael and Bobby decided to drive to Long Island to meet with Eddie and his adoptive parents, and as soon as the two met, they knew that they were brothers. Little did they know that their story would take yet another turn a few years later, when their other brother, David, came across the story of the twins being reunited while he was studying at Queens College. As soon as he saw the other two men, he felt as if he was looking at himself in a mirror, and he decided to make contact by phoning Eddie's house, speaking to Eddie's mother, who instantly recognized how similar the two men's voices were. As soon as news broke of the triplets' reunion, the story would take the world by storm, with the three men receiving widespread media attention, even appearing on popular talk shows to discuss their strange situation. They decided to rent an apartment in Flushing, Queens, while they set about getting to know each other, as they should have when they were children. They did eventually meet their birth mother, but nothing came of it as she decided to not keep contact. It wasn't all smooth sailing for the triplets though. During some periods, two of the brothers would get along better, leaving the third feeling like a third wheel, but eventually they decided to open a restaurant together, aptly named the Triplets Romanian Steakhouse. Bobby's parents were angered by the fact that the three boys were seen as nothing more than a psychological experiment, and they decided to take legal action, but were unable to find a law firm that would take on their case. The three men would eventually go their separate ways and start their own families. Eddie passed away in 1995, and as the years passed, the two other brothers would grow apart, as is often the case when siblings start to focus on their own families. The results of the experiment will only be released in 2065, and they're currently being held at Yale University by order of Neubauer. Despite the outrage felt by members of the public when the experiment came to light, Neubauer never showed any remorse for his actions and defended his decisions until he eventually passed away in 2008. Number 3. Missing person cases are increasing all over the world on a nearly daily basis, with many of these people never being found, despite the best efforts of investigators who follow up on every single lead that they receive. Many of these cases do have a positive outcome though, as the missing person is found to be alive and well, and they're able to return to their normal lives, putting the time that they were missing behind them. But there are some cases that many people would consider to be so outlandish that they almost seem made up. It would eventually take one dogged private investigator and many months of speculation to get to the bottom of a mystery that most people would not see coming. In June of 1994, Nicholas Barclay was living with his mother in San Antonio, Texas. She was battling an addiction to illegal substances but managed to hold down a steady job, working nights at a convenience store in the area. But Nicholas was known to get into trouble often, as he started stealing and breaking into people's houses. He would also stay out of school for no reason, and his teachers reported that he gave them little respect, on some occasions getting into heated arguments with them. At home, things weren't much different, as he often fought with his mother, and when she felt she could no longer control him, she asked her older son, Jason, to move into the home to help her with Nicholas's behavioral problems. But this did little to solve the problem, as Jason was known to have had a temper, and soon Nicholas was informed that he would need to appear in court for his past misdeeds. The outcome of this court appearance would determine whether or not Nicholas would be sent to a group home, which he was understandably dead set against. The court date was scheduled for the 14th of June of that year, but on the 13th, Nicholas would vanish, never to be seen or heard from again. When inquiries were made into his strange disappearance, it was found that he was last seen playing basketball a short distance from his house. At one point, he phoned home to ask his mother to pick him up, but Jason answered the phone and told him that he would have to walk home since their mother was sleeping in preparation for her night shift, and that he wasn't going to wake her up. This was the last time that any member of his family ever spoke to Nicholas. Some sources state that he actually vanished on the 10th and that his mother waited 3 days before filing a missing person case, since Nicholas was in the habit of staying away from home for days on end. Given this history, the police also didn't take the case too seriously when it was eventually opened, and many people speculate that Nicholas may have been found if something was done about his disappearance sooner. Strangely, Jason contacted the police a few months later to report that Nicholas had been at the house where he attempted to break into the garage, but no sign of Nicholas was found, and it isn't certain how believable Jason's report actually was, since there also wasn't any evidence of an attempted break-in. Searches were conducted and flyers were distributed with Nicholas's photo printed on them, but no leads ever led to him being found, and soon the case turned cold. 3 years went by with no sign of him, but then there came a plot twist in the case. Authorities contacted Nicholas's mother to inform her that he'd been found in Spain and that he had been abducted by a high-ranking official. During this time, it was claimed that he'd been subjected to experiments, one of which was changing his eye color from blue to brown. As soon as she received word of the discovery, Nicholas's sister traveled to Spain to pick him up, and upon returning to Texas, she asked him to live with her and her son. Nicholas's mother was overjoyed by the fact that her son had been found, and she, as well as the rest of the family, seemed to pay little attention to the fact that his eyes were a different color, since this had been explained to them. They did, however, notice a few small irregularities in his appearance, such as his ears, which were now a different shape, and the fact that he spoke with a slight French accent, despite reportedly being held in Spain for 3 years. They should have followed their instincts, though, as it came to light 5 months later that this wasn't Nicholas BARLAY, but an adult French man who was living in Nicholas's sister's home. He was, in fact, a man by the name of Frederick Borden. Borden was born to a single mother who would often leave him home alone while she went out to drink. He would eventually be placed in the custody of his grandparents, but he showed behavioral problems from an early age, often telling friends that his father was working as a spy and thus was never home. He would eventually run away from home and end up in Paris, where he stole the identity of an English boy named Jimmy Sale. But this ruse soon came to an end, as he didn't know much English and was sent to a juvenile facility. He soon ran away again, though, and eventually ended up back in Paris. He would assume the identities of a further 18 people, but his deceit would always be uncovered, forcing him to move to a new area. When he eventually turned 18, he could no longer rely on the safety net of child welfare services, and he had no idea how to survive. He eventually decided to steal Nicholas BARLAY's identity after learning that he'd been missing for years, even though he was now a 23-year-old adult. He called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in America, pretending to be the director of a shelter in Spain. He then claimed to have come across a boy that fit Nicholas's description, and once it was accepted that Nicholas had been found, he dyed his hair to assume his identity. It was all going smoothly for Borden until a private investigator, Charlie Parker, was asked to investigate Nicholas's abduction. As soon as he saw the dissimilarities between the two, he became suspicious that Borden was lying about his identity, and after doing a little further digging, the FBI became involved in the case, and it soon became apparent that Borden was an imposter. He was arrested at Nicholas's mother's house and would then reveal the true extent of his deceit. He pleaded guilty to obtaining and possessing false documents, as well as perjury, and he would be ordered to serve 6 years behind bars. He has since gone on to start his own family and is said to be living in France once more. Number 2. CCTV security footage is an integral part of any missing person investigation, as it often helps establish that person's last known movements, and a timeline of events can be created. often leading to them being found and the person responsible for their disappearance being held accountable for their actions. But in some inexplicable cases, security footage only confuses matters even further, as it shows events that seem impossible, which is exactly what happened in the case of a newlywed couple that mysteriously disappeared in Korea in 2016. Kim Yoon-suk and Choi Sung-hee had their wedding in 2015, after which they lived in an apartment in Busan, which is situated in South Korea. Before long, Choi fell pregnant, and the couple was excited to welcome their first child to the world, though they still had a few months to wait. But 6 months after they'd gotten married, things dramatically changed as the couple inexplicably went missing and remained so to this day. On the 27th of May, 2016, Choi was captured on security footage in their apartment building as she returned home alone at around 11:30 p.m. She had been attending a drama class and was known to have stopped off at a convenience store while she was making her way back to the apartment. Kim wasn't home at the time, as he was spending some time with a few of his friends, and the group had decided to go out for a few drinks. He would spend most of the night out, only returning to the apartment sometime between 3 and 4 a.m., and he too was captured by security cameras in the building's elevator. This was only one of 21 cameras that kept watch on the building, but strangely, they would do nothing to aid in the couple's disappearance. After Kim's father had not heard from him in several days, he became concerned and asked that their apartment be checked. But when investigators arrived, they found it empty, with no signs that anything untoward had taken place. At first, it was assumed that they'd simply decided to go on holiday, since most of their personal belongings were no longer in the apartment. This included their phones, wallets, and laptops, and most importantly, their passports. Strangely, some of the food that Choi had bought at the convenience store was still sitting in the bag on the kitchen counter, and the rest would later be found in her car, which was in the building's parking garage. But it soon became obvious that something was wrong, as the couple's dog was found abandoned but unharmed in the apartment. They hadn't left any food out, which was very out of character, and an investigation was quickly underway. When CCTV footage of all 21 cameras in the building was checked by as many as 70 officers, they saw both Kim and Choi arriving home that night, but there was no footage of them leaving, which seemed almost impossible given all the angles that are covered by the security cameras. It was assumed that they may have known enough about the camera angles to leave while avoiding being seen, but no one could find any reason why they would choose to do so. It was then found that both Kim and Choi's phones were active on the 28th, as several text messages had been sent, but it wasn't clear whether they had been the ones who sent them. Choi's assistant director received a text from her phone, informing him that she would be unable to attend a rehearsal that was scheduled for the next day, as she'd fallen ill, and 2 days later, he received another informing him that Choi had been hospitalized and would not be able to perform. The man would later state that the text messages seemed strange since they were very formal and Choi usually had a very relaxed tone to her messages, but he didn't think too much more of it. Staff at the restaurant, which was owned by Kim, would tell investigators that they received a phone call from him in which he sounded exhausted, and he stated that he would not be coming in for an undetermined amount of time, but he did send some money to cover the everyday running of the business. They noted that the caller didn't sound like Kim, but they put it down to him being tired. But all communication from the couple ceased on the 2nd of June, as both of their phones were suddenly switched off, and when they were tracked, Kim's was found to be in Busan and Choi's in Seoul, which investigators found very suspicious. This led officers to scour the CCTV footage from around the city, which contained more than 800 security cameras, but they were unable to find any trace of them, and it started to seem as though they'd simply vanished into thin air. When it came to light that Kim's ex-girlfriend, a woman known as Yoon, still had feelings for him after their separation due to feuds between the two families, she became the focus of the investigation, despite the fact that she'd gotten married. Her marriage eventually failed after her husband accused her of having an affair with Kim, but she soon remarried and moved to Norway. Soon after, she contacted Kim to say that he had ruined her life, and she started sending threatening messages to Choi. Investigators believe that Kim and Yoon never stopped contacting each other, and that he had a second phone that Choi was unaware of. They became even more convinced of Yoon's involvement in the couple's disappearance when they found that she'd traveled back to Korea shortly after Choi announced that she was pregnant, and that she hadn't told anyone, including her family, that she had done so. Attempts were made to have Yoon brought back to Korea for questioning, but since there was no solid evidence that she was involved in the couple's strange disappearance, they were unable to do so. All that could be done at this point was to ask members of the public to come forward with any information that they had on the case, and the couple's photos were made available to all media outlets. But no further leads were ever found, leading to much speculation as to what actually happened in this inexplicable case. Most people believe that Yoon was indeed responsible for Kim and Choi going missing, and that she either ended their lives or did away with Choi so that she could be with Kim. But others think that the couple decided to disappear due to threats made by Yoon, and that they simply wanted to start a new life somewhere else where they would not be tracked down by anyone, including their families. This mystery remains unsolved, and with each passing year, it seems ever more unlikely that we'll ever find out what happened to the couple, as the case has now gone cold and no further clues were ever uncovered. Number 1. In 1939, Ada Constance Kent was well known at the Whalebone pub in Essex, as she often stopped in to buy a pack of cigarettes. But she'd made a name for herself many years earlier, as she was known as a well-versed actress who saw success both on screen and in the theater. She never married and spent most of her young adult life focusing on her acting career in London. But when it came time to retire, she decided to relocate to the quiet countryside. Though she was known to just about everyone in the area, she rarely socialized and was described as a recluse. On the 6th of March, 1939, Ada went into the Whalebone pub once more, buying a pack of cigarettes as she was in the habit of doing, but then she simply disappeared. One of Ada's friends eventually reported her disappearance to police when she was unable to find her for 3 months. She had exhausted all efforts, including actually entering Ada's cottage to look for her, but she found no sign of her. The first and most obvious course to take was for investigators to check the cottage once again, and a police officer by the name of Bernard Constable was given the task. He reported that he checked every inch of the building but could find no sign of Ada, or anyone else for that matter. In his report, he noted that the cottage wasn't locked when he arrived, and inside he found Ada's dinner tray with some of her meals still present. He also found a copy of Romeo and Juliet, still open, sitting on top of a chair close to her fireplace, and added that her coat was hanging on a coat rack. The cottage would remain untouched for years while the investigation was ongoing, but Ada's friends became frustrated at the lack of progress in the case, as there just weren't any clues to follow up on. This led one man, George Winecall, who was known to be one of Ada's closest friends, to take matters into his own hands, as he decided to break into her cottage by breaking the front door down and letting himself in. He proceeded to search the cottage with a fine-tooth comb, leaving no corner unchecked as he searched under the furniture, looked inside all of the cottage's cupboards, and even searched for clues outside. But all he could find was what had already been noted, the dinner tray and the book that had been left behind. But then came a twist in the case's plot. 7 years after Winecall searched the cottage, investigators received a call from a bank in which they stated that they were attempting to contact Ada but had been unsuccessful by this point. When asked why they were looking for her, the bank replied that an unusual number of large deposits had been made into her account, and they found the transactions to be unusual. For reasons unknown, investigators then decided to check Ada's cottage one more time, and this time they had no explanation for what they found. The cottage was in the same state as it had been many years earlier, but this time, the copy of Romeo and Juliet was no longer on the chair as it had been for years. This was quickly put down to children in the area who were known to break into the cottage on occasion, and it was likely that one of them took it as a keepsake. But this was the least shocking discovery. When an officer walked into Ada's bedroom to search it, as had been done on many occasions, he found a skeleton lying next to Ada's bed, and remarkably, it was fully dressed, though no sources state whether it was dressed in Ada's clothes. Then another clue was uncovered. Lying next to the skeleton, officers found a bottle with a label that read poison. The rest of the cottage was checked, and everything else was as it had been left after the initial searches, with Ada's jewelry and cash still there. And so it was determined that no robbery had taken place. No one knew what to make of the discovery, as there was no way of proving whether the skeleton belonged to Ada, or if it was someone who'd passed away in the building sometime in the years that had passed since her disappearance. There was also the unlikely chance that it had been placed there by someone as a prank, though many people think this theory doesn't hold much water. Investigators stated at an inquest that was held regarding the case that they believed the remains to be those of Ada Kent, but that they had no clues as to how she may have passed away. It was then revealed by a man named Derek Edward Allen, who was a child at the time of Ada's mysterious disappearance, that he and other children in the area would often break into the cottage when he was about 12 years old. He added that they had spotted the bones in the bedroom on several occasions, but they always assumed that they'd been left there by an animal that had brought bones into the cottage. When the landlord of the Whalebone pub was asked to give evidence, he stated when he last saw Ada on the night that she stopped in to buy cigarettes, he noticed that she seemed to be sick as she was coughing profusely. Reuben G. Winkle, who worked as a gardener at a nearby church, stated that he saw a light on in Ada's cottage the night before she went missing. He also testified that he and a police officer had gone to the cottage 6 months after Ada went missing, and he recalled that when they looked into her bedroom, they saw no bones and could find no evidence that someone had passed away in the building. It was never determined whether the remains found in the cottage belonged to Ada, or if someone had stumbled inside before passing away. A county pathologist stated that he and a few of his colleagues studied the remains found in the cottage and read through descriptions given of Ada before she went missing, and they found many similarities, leading them to believe that the skeleton did indeed belong to the missing woman. But many people found this hard to believe, as the cottage had been searched on many occasions, not only by police officers, but also by some of Ada's friends who were desperately looking for answers as to what may have happened to her. They could see no possible scenario where the remains could have been present and just overlooked during all of these searches. The mystery of Ada's disappearance has never been solved, and it's one that will remain that way for a very long time, if not forever. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.